Hello, my wonderful art students. I hope you had a good weekend. Today, first grade is going to be making homemade watercolor. Second grade is going to be doing nature rubbings. Third grade is going to be changing an existing artwork. And fourth grade, you're kind of the same, but you're redrawing one. And in fifth grade, you're doing a found object sculpture. So let's go ahead and get started. So second grade with you guys, you're going to be going outside. So make sure that you practice social distancing and that you have a parent permission to be out there. And you just want to look for leaves that have different textures or different things that have different textures. Whenever you are doing your rubbings, you can use your mechanical pencil, but it's not going to give you the best results because it's hard to turn it sideways. Crayons or a regular pencil, a number 2 pencil that you sharpen will give you better results. In order to create a rubbing, you take and place your object under the paper and then take your object that you're drawing with across the top of where it's placed and it'll pick up the texture. Some things work better than others, and if you need to, you can flip your leaf over and try again if the veins in the leaf aren't picked up the first time, because what it's going to pick up are going to be the veins and the outlines of your leaf. If you found something outside that's hard to keep in place, you can always use a piece of tape to hold it still while you're doing your rubbing. If you rub around the edges a lot, you might pick up the texture of the tape. So make sure if you do this that you focus on where the object is and not the tape. As you're creating your different rubbings, remember that texture is the way something feels. And even though leaves might have similar textures, the way that their veins and different parts of the top of them are put together will determine how much texture is picked up on your paper when you do your rubbing. You might also notice some of your leaves leaving their green mark behind on your paper. Crayons and colored pencil will pick up your texture best. The number 2 pencils also do well. Markers and your mechanical pencil will be the things that you want to try to stay away from. As you're doing your rubbings, you can alternate between colors, keep the same color. You can do different color families. It's up to you on what you choose to do. I'm going to go ahead and use the mechanical pencil to give you an example of the result that it might produce. If your leaf is really textured, it might show a few of the different veins through the paper, but usually you don't see much. Whenever you use your leaves to create your rubbings, they do leave marks on the back. They might also bleed through to the front if they are really wet. We had some rain last night, so this leaf had extra moisture in it, and that's why it left that really wet mark on my paper. I'm going to finish my rubbings with the 4-leaf clover. We're really lucky in that we have a lot of these in our yard. So before I start with it, I want to flatten it out because my goal for this is to find the shape of the different leaves since I can't find the veins very well. Before we start making homemade watercolor, I want to go ahead and erase my pencil right there because I want to turn these rubbings into a piece of art with my watercolor that I use. So I'm going to start out with coffee. You can also use tea. Be aware that whenever you are making homemade watercolor, if you use fruits, vegetables, tea, coffee, things like that, that they will leave a smell on your paper, sometimes for a very long time after you use it. So I'm using coffee to give my paper the effect of being old. Since we are creating our own watercolors, it would be a good idea to have a paper towel or cloth near you in case messes happen or you need to clean something off. And then as you're working, if you're not able to find a brush, a Q-tip would work just as well. I also have a spray bottle of water so I can clean my brush or my bowls as I need to. You could have a cup of water that you could just use little bits of as needed. Next, I'm going to use a frozen blueberry across my paper, and since my paper's already wet, it's going to bleed into the coffee that I used. And with blueberries, they can draw on your paper like I just showed you, or you can smush them and make your own paint. The great thing about them is that they clean off really easily with a rag. You'll notice that the skin of the blueberry produces more of a blue, like a blue-violet tone, whereas the inside is more of a like red-violet. It's kind of pink. So this project is all about experimentation and seeing what you can do to create different effects on your paper. And so, make sure you're with an adult when you're doing this. You don't want to get into something you're not supposed to or use food you're not supposed to. And as you're creating this piece of art, you might want to throw away if it starts to get stinky, especially because there could be bits of fruit left in it. Again, it's just experimenting and figuring out different ways to use things. Next, I'm going to use a mandarin orange. I'm going to smush it to create my pigment. I could set it on my paper, but my paper is really wet. And since it's copy paper, wet copy paper tends to rip real easily. Whenever you use this orange juice, it's going to give you a very subtle or very light golden yellow color. In between each thing, I'm cleaning off my bowl and my paintbrush. The next thing I want us to use are strawberries. And strawberries are fun because if you leave them sitting on paper, they'll actually create stamps of themselves. This is a frozen strawberry though, so when it starts to thaw out, it gets mushy. So instead of continuing to stamp with it, I'm gonna mush them with a little bit of water to create some watercolor pigment or paint. This is going to be more like a jam, so you might want to add a little more water to it than you did with your blueberries to get that color to come out and not leave the gel part. The color doesn't come out of the strawberry as easily as it did with the blueberries. It's going to look more pink than red on your paper. I know I'm rinsing my paintbrush a lot, so if you have a Q-tip, you could just take and use the opposite ends of it and maybe use even multiple Q-tips instead of trying to rinse them out. I'm not sure how well the cotton would hold up. Okay, the next thing I want to show you guys how to do is how to use old makeup to create watercolor. You can also use them like pastels. So I have some old eyeshadows, and I'm going to start by scraping off a little bit of the powder into my bowl. And because I want to make a blue violet, I want to add my blue and then my purple to it. Make sure if you are using makeup that you have asked permission and that it is okay with whoever it belongs to. Once I've got my powder in my bowl, I'm going to add some water and stir it up. Some of the granules or the little parts of the powder might not mix in as well depending on the type of makeup it is. But as you see, as I paint my paper, it gives me a nice bold color. And as I spread it out, it lightens. Old makeup can work really well as pastels too. I even use it in my polymer clay projects to create different types of color. Now we're going to move on to how you can use something to stain your paper without having to turn it into watercolor. Here I have a dandelion, an orange peel, and a leaf. And so we're going to start with dandelions. If you have ever rubbed dandelion on something, you know that it leaves yellow behind really well. Most flower petals will do this. Just make sure if you're using flower petals that you have asked permission to pick them. I'm really pleased with how well my dandelion color is showing up on my paper. I grabbed this orange peel thinking that it would show up as well, and it doesn't. It actually doesn't really show at all. So I tried it a few times and then decided just to put it to the side. Next up is my leaf. Leaves will leave the green on your paper just like you saw whenever second grade was doing their leaf rubbings. And so as you are working with it, there's different ways you can apply it. Notice I'm trying to roll a crayon, press it down. I tried just kind of rubbing it with my fingers. So there's several different ways you can experiment with applying it to your paper. And don't be afraid if it comes apart. That's completely normal, because if you're working with it like this, it kind of tears them up. Before we stop, I want to show you what you can do with eyeshadow on your paper, because I have a few places that are dry. So if you have an old applicator, you can use it to draw with, or you can use a Q-tip. But notice I can go in and add shadow by just tapping my black or my gray eyeshadow onto my paper. All right, 3rd and 4th grade, you guys are changing a picture completely and restarting, or you're altering your picture. So I'm going to give you the option of doing that. If you don't want to restart, you don't have to. You can alter a picture or change a picture. For this one, we did this our first week, I think, of AMI. And so I'm going to go in and add some more details and blend in some details from a different picture to this artwork. So this was an underwater scene, and I'm going to start by adding some underwater hills and mountains, and I'm going to turn my mountain into a cave. As an artist, it is completely normal to go in and change your artwork or even start over completely. Whenever you're working on a piece, I know I only see you guys once a week, and so you only have once a week with me to work on your pieces. But if you're ever working on something at home, you might work on it and come back to it later, and it might take you several sit downs before you finish it. So for me, I wanted to add my little monster that was sad in a different picture, and instead of making him sad, I'm going to make it happy this time. I thought that an underwater cave would be the perfect home for it. I started out with an arch for the body and the belly, 2 circles for the eyes, and then a circle inside of each eye, and then I blacked out the pupil and left 2 circles in each pupil for the shine. I gave it eyebrows and the letter C and a backward C for its hands, and then I added its spikes on top of its head. It is under the water, so I want to make sure and add some bubbles to it as well. And I think to finish off, I'm going to add in some more seaweed to the front. All right, 5th grade, you are creating a found object sculpture. So I am going to be using paper, Ziploc bag, toothpicks, cardboard, and tape. I'm going to be making a sculpture that's permanent, so that means I'm going to be taping things together. But if you just want to use objects that are not taped together and then you take it apart when you're finished, that's fine too. When creating my piece with my paper, I'm going to start by tearing what I need off, and you can cut it, but if you don't have scissors, you can also fold it back and forth a few times and then tear it on the seam. I'm going to need a few pieces of tape, so I'm going to go ahead and have those ready so I don't have to stop and try to tear them off as I'm rolling. So for my paper, I'm going to use it to create a frame for a shape that I have an idea for, and I'm going to roll it really tight, and then I'm going to tape it where the roll stops. I'm going to need to repeat this 3 times, and each of my sticks that I create with this technique are going to need to be about the same length. It takes practice to be able to get this on the first try, so don't be surprised if it takes you a little while to get your rolls good if you're, creating what I'm creating. Again, remember, you can use scissors, or if you don't have scissors available when you're using paper, you can take and fold it on the same seam several times and then tear it on that seam. Okay, so I finished my 3 and I'm going to measure, and they are about the same length, which is good. I'm going to be creating a triangle shape with them. So I'm going to put it how I want it to kind of visualize how it needs to be arranged. I'm going to need some really thin strips of tape for this next part, so I'm going to go ahead and tear them off and wrap it around the top, and then wrap it around the sides on each crisscross point. string can also work really well to bind two edges like this together, but I figured since I have tape, I might as well use it. Okay, I have my frame done, so now I'm going to go ahead and use my Ziploc bag, and I want to create a stained glass effect. So I'm going to use crayon on top of my Ziploc bag to give me some different colors. I'm going to use cool colors, blues, greens, and well, I guess it's red violet, but I was trying to find purple. You might want to stay away from marker because if you use marker, it'll bleed onto your hands. Crayon does not do that. Sharpie or permanent marker would work the best in this situation, but I don't have colored Sharpies available at home. They're all at school. Since my table surface is brown, I'm putting white paper under it so I can see what the color looks like. I'm going to go ahead and cut out what I've colored. I tried tearing it to see if it would work, but tearing the plastic doesn't work as well as cutting it. I don't want my plastic to fill the whole shape of my triangle, so I want to try to cut it down to the portion that I do want it to cover. And I'm going to have to get creative with how I tape it onto the paper rolls that I've created. As an artist, it's okay to make mistakes. Whenever you're working through problems, you're learning. The angle was off on my first try, so I had to take it off and try again. Now I'm going to work on my base. I was able to find cardboard in our garage, so I'm going to start off by making it into a rectangle, and then I'm going to cut a diagonal slit on each corner so that way I can fold them over themselves, and you'll see what I'm talking about in just a second. Now that I've cut my corners, I'm going to fold my edges up, and I'm going to try to make sure they are even. Each of the corners gets folded in as well. If you're counting how many things I fold 4 edges, and then we have 4 corners, but there's 2 folds on each corner, so I'm actually folding 8 times when it comes to my corners. Once they're folded, I'll overlap the corners and then tape them. Craftsmanship is how well you make something. Whenever you're creating a sculpture, it's very important that your craftsmanship is really good because sculptures could fall over, they could, break apart. So you just want to make sure that things are even and where they're supposed to be. So for me, I'm making my base, and I wanted to make sure that it wouldn't rock back and forth when I put my sculpture on top of it. My next step is to create the bottom of my sculpture. I'm going to be creating a ring shape. When you create a sculpture, you not only want to have interesting pieces, but you also want to think about the way the space in between those pieces work. So I'm thinking about how I want my triangle and my circle to be stacked. I decided I wanted to turn my triangle upside down. Another word for that is inverted. Now that my triangle's in place, I'm going to tape it. I want the space inside my circle to look interesting. I'll be using toothpicks to add an extra upside down triangle or inverted triangle. I don't think the toothpicks will move, but I want to make sure they stay in the position of a triangle. So I'm going to add tape where they overlap. Now that my sculpture is finished, it's time to add it to my base. I'm going to add 2 rolls of tape underneath my circle, and then I'm going to run tape across the inside of the circle to make sure it's nice and secure. It's at this point that I'll see if my base will do its job of keeping my sculpture stable. As I look at my sculpture, I realize that I want to add a little more color to the space inside of my triangle. I also feel like it doesn't have a lot of different textures, so I'm going to use the rest of my plastic to create both texture and color inside of my triangle. I'm going to do that by braiding my plastic. My final step is to secure the bottom and add it to my sculpture. Once your sculpture is finished, think about where you want to place it. Light and surroundings are very important things to consider. Do you want it to blend in or do you want it to stand out? Thanks for creating with me today. I wish you well, my wonderful art students.